Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Well, first of all, I thank all of you for making the trip here to EMU on such a wintry day. It was so unexpected as a wintry day. If you don't know me, I'm Richard Rubenfeld, and I'm a professor of art history here at Eastern. And this is actually my fifth exhibition devoted to comic and cartoon art. And I couldn't be more delighted than to have the people that I have here seated next to me. And so, the way we're going to work it, I will introduce you to each of them, tell you a little bit about them. I'll ask a couple of questions to each of the panelists. I'm going to ask the panelists then if they have questions to ask the other panelists, and then we'll open up questions for the floor. And last about an hour and a half, an hour and 20 minutes, something like that. So you think we can do that?
Yes.
So of course this is a show and a panel devoted to excellence in cartoons and comics. And Eastern Michigan University has had 5 exhibitions since 2001 devoted to original cartoon and comic art. And just so that you folks can get a sense of who's here, I may ask the people who are in the audience here, if you would raise your hand if you are included in the show, so that people can get a sense of, of the people who are here. So not only do I get to moderate a panel of great comics creators here, but also to speak of an audience that has a large contingent of comics creators. And my love of comics goes back to when I was 4 years old. And my father worked with a man by the name of Carl Jung, not the psychologist, but spelled differently, whose son went off to college, whose mother-in-law was moving in, and he had to empty out the room for his mother-in-law to have a place to stay, and delivered a box of coverless comic books. And from age 4 on, I'm still there, okay? And I dare say that similar stories could be told by people here about their first experiences with comics. But, I'll ask some questions again to the panelists, but I'm going to start off by introducing you to Sara Ryan. And Sara, you may know Sara best as a children's book author. But Sara also has been active in the field of comics and graphic novels. She was nominated for an Eisner Award, which is an award that is fandom-based for a mini-comic called Me and Edith Head. All right, and there's an absolutely spectacular graphic novel out right now called Badhouses that Sara did in collaboration with Collis Speed McNeil. It's a wonderful, wonderful graphic novel. If you've not read a graphic novel before, it's a great one to start with, but it will spoil you. Okay? And so we're delighted to have Sara aboard. Sara, now you grew up in the Ann Arbor area, right? Mm-hmm. So some of you may know her from her time here. Next to her is somebody that she kind of knows, Steve Lieber, her husband. And Steve lived in Ann Arbor. Steve lived in Ann Arbor for a while. In the early 90s, I got to know him. And Steve is a cartoonist. He has drawn many major characters in the comics world. When we first met him, he was drawing Hawkman. But more recently, Spider-Man, Hawkeye. Steve won an Eisner Award for his illustrations for the second Whiteout book. And also worked on the sequel to The Road to Perdition graphic novel, and his most recent, at least the most recent one I've read called Underground, is also absolutely fabulous. And so we're delighted to have Steve here as well. In the center, my oldest friend here, doesn't necessarily mean old by age, although I guess it does. Len Wein and I have known each other, since Roman numerals?
I
think so.
A week and a half before fire.
Before fire, yeah. And Len is, in the Comic Hall of Fame, Eisner Award winner. Len has written more comics and edited more comics than just about anybody I know. A co-creator of Wolverine, Swamp Thing, Human Target. He has written and edited everything from Superman to Mickey Mouse. And, I guess the most recent thing that you are known for, perhaps, is editing The Watchmen graphic novel.
Yes.
So he was the editor of a very, very prestigious novel. So Len Wein. A new friend all the way to the right of Len is Hilary Price. And Hilary Price, I've only met her a couple hours ago, but she has made me laugh for a long time. If you see her panel, it's called Rhymes with Orange. It's wonderfully witty, droll, inventive. Again, it's always guaranteed to make me laugh, make me smile. As I recall, you are the youngest woman ever to get a syndicated feature.
Yeah, at the
newspaper.
time, yeah.
And she won, I think, a Reuben Award, which is a National Cartoonist Society Award for Best Panel. I forget what year, 2007, 2008, somewhere in there. But fabulous comic strip, runs in the Free Press. Remember newspapers? Okay? And I'm absolutely delighted to have met Hilary and to have her aboard on the panel.
Thanks.
I think I can reasonably say that the next person needs no introduction, but I'm going to introduce them anyway. And Dave Coverley, and Dave has been on, what, 3 of my panels, 4 of my panels? Dave is the creator, writer, artist of Speedbump, a syndicated panel that is in hundreds and hundreds of newspapers. He draws cartoons for Parade magazine. He's a children's book illustrator. That he is best known for the Speedbump panel. He won in 2009 the National Cartoonist Society Cartoonist of the Year Award. And so, give a hand to Dave Coverley and everybody panel. So, I'm going to sit down now, and then I'm going to just generally ask some questions to each of them. And again, I don't want to hog the microphone, because I'm hoping that they will have questions to ask, and also give you folks time to ask whatever questions you have too. So, I guess I'll start with Sara. So Sara, do you want to tell us how you got into graphic novels and mini comics?
Absolutely. And I also want to clarify that the prose books I've written are really for teenagers. If you try to give them to younger children, you will probably get in trouble. So don't do that. But my comics trajectory kind of started with Cricket magazine that I got growing up, into ElfQuest and Sandman, as with so many others. But I actually want to shout out to a couple folks in the audience. One of the first mini comics I started reading was by Sean Bury, who is in the back there. And I also got many awesome book recommendations from Mr. Jim Ottaviani. And so it was really a combination of all of that stuff that combined to make me interested in writing comics myself. And I still have so much respect for people who can actually draw the comics. But yeah, that's how I got into writing them.
Okay. And Steve, I know a little more about your background, but I know you went to the Joe Kubert School of Comic Art. Tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to what you do now.
I was a childhood obsessive. I don't remember a time when I wasn't not just reading comics, but literally obsessed with it. I'm told, I don't remember it, but I'm told the very first comic I ever read was actually pornography.
Moving the microphone closer for that.
Yeah. Apparently my dad was coming home and saw a comic book that was sitting on a bench somewhere and thought, oh, my kid will like that, and picked it up without looking at it. And it was some S. Clay Wilson piece of vileness.
But still,
and from there, it was just a childhood spent living more intensely in stuff printed on paper than in the world around me, which I was desperately trying to avoid. I wanted nothing to do with anything that was three-dimensional and tangible. Had a much better time with images printed on paper. And I just pursued that for a really long time. I had a brief stint where I lied to myself and told myself I was actually going to be a business major at Penn State University. But I was taking an 8 a.m. accounting class, and I had a notebook where I was doodling in the margin and taking notes on the main part of the page. And over the course of the semester, I could see my doodles physically taking up more of each page. It was like a flip book of me making my career choice. And by the end, I realized it was time to quit kidding myself and go study comics, and that's what I did, and now I'm here.
Great. So Len, why don't you fill us in a little bit about your background and how you got into what you do?
It's such a surreal story, though. I was a sickly kid in the hospital at the age of 7. My dad bought me a stack of comics to read, and I was hooked. I just loved it. I was a comic book fan from that moment on. And when I was in junior high school, in the 8th grade, I guess, I had a art teacher named Mr. Smedley, which I've never forgotten, who I drew a picture of a shark one day, and he looked at the picture and said, "That shows real talent. You could be an artist." And my immediate reaction was, "Great, then I'll be a comic artist." And so I majored in art. Back in the days when there were arts programs in regular schools, I majored in every possible art class they had. Ceramics. I mean, that'll make me a great comic book artist. It was an art course. So I took everything. And I used to go up to the DC offices on their monthly tour, back in the days when they actually gave a monthly tour of the offices, where you could see grown-ups in suits and ties sitting and drawing comics. And they became familiar with me and with Marv Wolfman, who was my best friend at the time, and I did some art samples for DC, showed up there one day. I was so professional I forgot to make an appointment. And I was there. Yes? No, I just talk right quiet.
Get a rid-
Hi, Mike.
See if that one is better.
Okay.
Thanks, Nadine.
Is this any better?
All right.
So, someone else will fill you in on the first half of the stories. I'm not even doing that. Anyway, I went up to D.C. I would see Dick Giordano, who wasn't even in that day. And I'm standing there, having no idea what to do with myself. Carmine Infantino, who was editorial director, and Joe Orlando came back from lunch, and they recognized me. Say, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Well, I was here to show my art samples to Mr. Giordano, but he's not in." And Carmine said, "Well, show them to my boy Joey here. If he likes them, you're in." And Joe took them and came back about 15 minutes later and said, "Well, your art still needs some work. It's got potential, but it's not really ready yet. But I like your writing. Would you like to try writing for my new House of Mystery book?" And I said, "Sure," because at that point, to get into the business, I would have taken the job of stapling the books together. And I pitched a few stories to Joe. He bought them, and I've been a writer ever since.
Okay. So Hilary, what can you tell us about your background and what brought you into Rhymes with Orange?
You bet. I would say that those little pocket books are what brought me into reading, and I used to go to the library and get BC books out of the library, and more so than Peanuts, that's what I really loved. And I would say that my journey to cartooning wasn't, from the womb as these guys were. There were kind of tiny epiphanies along the way that would come up, and then I'd forget them. And then they'd come up, and I'd forget them. And so when I was in middle school, Boyton stuff was really, really big. The hippos and the greeting cards and that kind of thing. And I loved it. I loved them, and I would copy them. And I was in a card shop one time, and I could hear two ladies on the other side of the card stack, and they were referring to Boyton as Sandra. And I had always assumed that Boyton was a George or a David. And it was a real surprise to me, and it was one of those little, like, poof moments of, oh, if she could do it, I could do it. And then I went to a very artsy high school, and I draw a very, very mediocre teacup. So I couldn't kind of, you're in high school and you try and find a place for yourself. So art was taken, so I took soccer. And it really wasn't until college in class I was an English major. I wanted to write. I've always seen myself as more as a writer who draws than an artist who writes. And I would, do little doodles in class and give them to friends and get a reaction. And I think it was that reaction that was so attractive to me. And then I took a year off between my junior and senior year of college, and I'd always wanted to go to Ireland. And so I got a job and lost that job, and then got another job and lost that job. And then my parents were like, do you want to come, do you want us to come visit you? I was like, yes, I have some free time. And there was a political satire magazine in Dublin called The Phoenix, and it was kind of like the National Lampoon of Dublin. And they had single panel cartoons in there. And so when my folks came to visit in Dublin, James Joyce is the favorite son in Dublin with those very signature round glasses. And so you see his face everywhere. And so me and Mom and Dad were walking down the promenade, and we see this giant bronze statue of the man. And my mom sees the glasses and goes, oh my God, it's Elton John. So I was like, I can make a cartoon about that. And so I, sent that in with a couple other single panel strips that I did, and I got a check. And I was like, oh, and I used that check to buy a train ticket. And it was like, wow. Like a cartoon can equal a train ticket. And so I finished up school and came back, finished up school, and then I was working freelancing at an ad agency, writing copy for a little bit. But I got a book out of the library about how to syndicate your cartoon and sent off samples. And then I heard back from one of them. And so that's how I got started.
Wonderful. Cool. Now, Dave, I know you've talked about this before in previous panels, but only some of the people here would have heard that. Tell us about how you got into cartooning and where you are now as a cartoonist, a children's book illustrator. Where did that all come from?
Yeah, that's, I think the interesting thing about probably all of us is that every kid draws. Every little kid draws. And so the trick is to keep drawing. Even people who don't draw now, when they're little, they drew. And so I've always drawn, but that's not any kind of special thing. And I was more of a Peanuts fan than a BC fan. The pocketbooks are great. That's a lot where it came from. But I actually had two experiences with teachers that were probably the most important things that happened to me. In 5th grade, I had a teacher, I would draw cartoons in the notebook. This 5th grade teacher was awesome. She would give us free time just to do whatever you wanted to do. And so I always did cartoons. And we had a parent-teacher conference, and my parents came in, and Mrs. Lamb said, Dave wants to be a cartoonist. And my parents laughed. They said, yeah, no, but what do you think, what's Dave interested in? And she said, no, he wants to be a cartoonist. And so they actually, that was the moment they told me that they said, okay, we can take this a little bit seriously. And I got into high school and I had another teacher just like that. In my senior year, I was the editor of the school paper. And I was doing cartoons for the paper. And he brought in the New Yorker. And I had never seen the New Yorker, and I didn't even know it existed. And the cartoons in there were just this total revelation, because I always thought of cartoons as like silly, just jokes and things. But these cartoons were about something. And so, I didn't understand like 3/4 of them, and I still don't understand 3/4 of them. But they said something to me like, you can do a cartoon that's funny and serious at the same time, and it can be totally about something. So that was when I first really got interested in doing the specific kind of panels that I do. So it was basically a matter of me just always doing. I suck at everything else. So that's why I just always did that. That's all I knew how to do. And so I went to school to be a writer. I went to Eastern and did cartoons for the Eastern Echo. Then I went to Indiana University for graduate school, did cartoons for the Indiana Daily Student, trying to get a master's in fiction. I thought I would teach writing because I didn't think that cartooning would work out. And one thing led to another, and people bought cartoons, and you're like, oh, people actually pay for cartoons. And then I spent the years from being 24 to being 30 trying to get syndicated. And so what I did was every time I got a rejection letter, which was 6 years worth, I would put those as wallpaper above my drawing table. And that was sort of my way of inspiring myself. It's like every time I got a rejection letter, it just made me mad and made me want to do it again. So I didn't get syndicated until I was 30. And that was the year my first daughter was born. And so that was, in fact, it's actually, Speedbump will be 20 years old in about 2 weeks.
Wow.
So it goes really, really fast, and it seems like yesterday that I was doing that. But as far as the children's books go, things like that, I mean, Speedbump to me is like what I do. But no matter how creative your job is, there's still always an element of like you've done it a lot. You know, even creativity gets boring after a while. And so I really wanted to try a few other things that were similar but different. And a children's book is awesome because you have a whole spread of white in front of you. Like what we do, we have like a little panel in front of you, and you got to fill that thing up, and it gets kind of samey, and it's very constricted. I love doing it, but it can be constricting. And children's books to me are just like this totally freeing, you know, a way of sort of tickling part of my brain that I wasn't able to tickle before. So pretty much my career is all about tickling.
So we may as well keep the microphone there. We'll work your way back to me. Tell us about the genesis of a typical Speedbump comic panel.
Well, I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of people here that have not seen my work, but I just do a single panel that's a joke a day, basically. I mean, I don't have continuing characters. It's very much like the things you see in the New Yorker. And those are all my heroes, pretty much the men and women of the New Yorker. But when I'm coming up with cartoon ideas, I'm actually not thinking of jokes. So the myth about being a cartoonist is that funny things happen to you during the day and you write them down and then they turn into cartoons. But it doesn't work that way, really. I mean, you might get something of an idea, but what happens with cartoons is that you just get subject matter. So when I'm thinking of a cartoon, I'm not thinking of a joke. I'm thinking of what the cartoon is going to be about first. So is it somebody hiring a plumber or whatever? But it has to be things that we all have in common. Because when we do these cartoons, especially in the paper, or even comic books, I mean, you're trying to reach as many people as possible, right? So I want my cartoon to appeal to as broad a base as I can. So I'm trying to think of things we all have in common, and so it always starts out with what a situation or something that we have in common. So even cartoons that have wordplay in them, they don't always start out with the wordplay. I mean, a lot of times you start out with what it's going to be about, and then when you're trying to think of what the joke will be about that subject, it might turn into wordplay. But mostly, for example, I'll just give one example and pass the microphone. I did a cartoon, and it was, everybody knows the Hansel and Gretel story. So that's what we do, is we work in sort of iconic things, shorthand, so that we don't have to explain the situation. So I was trying to think of a cartoon about Hansel and Gretel and sort of the witch in the candy house. And then further down in my notes, I was trying to think of a cartoon about suburban sprawl and just the way things are, you know, subdivisions spreading out and things. And so the two things just kind of came together. So I didn't come up with a cartoon specifically about either, but I came up with a cartoon about the candy house in the middle of a subdivision. And so for the cartoon to work, I had to draw the entire damn subdivision. So it has to be a really good idea before you allow yourself to draw an entire subdivision. And then the candy house right in the middle, and it's like some guy mowing the lawn around her and stuff. And the witch is basically saying, this used to be all forest. So, I hate explaining. I mean, jokes never work when you like say them, explain them. But that's just a good example of how a genesis of a joke is. It's like it's not always this epiphany. It's work, and you're putting things together, and it's like the left side of your brain and the right side of your brain coming together using creativity and logic. Because there's no logic involved, and nobody's going to follow your idea from where you might start out with an idea about a toaster, and come up with a joke about a postman. And the person who's reading it didn't start a toaster. They just want to rate the postman, like, what the hell? This doesn't make any sense. So we have to explain within the joke what we're doing.
Hilary.
I feel like it's funny about the candy house one, because I was thinking about a candy house and thinking about suburban sprawl. And no, but where I went with it is you had the witch in the candy house, and then next to her was a house made out of French fries and burgers and shakes, and she's saying something like, ugh, these McMansions. So, but it was actually through many years from when I started doing the strip, I was reading an interview about Johnny Hart, the guy that does BC, and he one of the things he would do to get cartoon ideas is he and a group of his friends would lock themselves in a hotel room and just drink themselves silly. But the other thing that he would do is that he would take a piece of paper and he would fold it in half, and on one side of the paper, 1 through 10, he'd write down, just off the cuff, 10 characters or animals or professions. So plumber, dog, giraffe, teacher, something like that. Then he'd turn that piece of paper over, and with the blank side, not looking at the other sheet, he would write down 10 professions or props. So if you think about a clue game, Mr. Peacock in the living room with a candlestick. And then he would open up the sheet and look at it, and then what he was trying to do was take two unlike things and try to justify why they would make sense, that logic piece. And I feel like that's not something that I do every day with a piece of paper, but it is something that I'm doing as I'm kind of having a controlled mind wandering. Why would a plumber have a candlestick? And it's not a joke unless it makes sense, unless I can point out something where people would then say, oh, of course that's why a plumber would have a candlestick. I don't have a joke about that.
By the end of tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
When I read the newspaper, and I'm looking for topics more than jokes. Like, oh gee, there's this thing about crime, and then on the next page there's this ad about dry cleaning. And I think one of the things that gets lost in online reading is that there's not this kind of illogical placement of information. So you don't get to make those kind of leaps as easily. So that's one place that I might find ideas. Another place I might find ideas is among friends. We're all talking and somebody might say something funny, and I've trained them now, and they're like, is that a cartoon idea? And if I go, they know it's not. And if I go like, yeah, they know they're okay. So that's just, I feel like I try, and there's lots of sources. I have dogs and cats, and while they don't actually give me the cartoon ideas, they remind me of experiences that other people might have.
Very good.
Yeah.
So Len, it's a little different writing comic book stories and graphic novels and editing them, but you want to talk a little bit about your creative process?
It's hard in my case, harder than I think most. And by the way, thank you for stealing the question I was going to ask the two of you about where do you get your ideas, because you have to come up with 365 a year. Yeah. And I only have to come up with a couple of dozen.
Damn you.
But every story comes from its own source. I always like to take the line, there's this little company in Nebraska that you send $100 every month, and they send you 45 story ideas, but that's not how it works. I've gotten stories from titles that I've come up with. I've gotten stories from a villain that suddenly came to mind. I've gotten stories from an ending, one of the tricks when I do monthly books is frequently I will run sort of a soap opera subplot through it with some of the characters, building to new stories. And there are occasions where I'll have something mysterious happen, and I have no idea where that's going. But I know that I'm going to have to find out where that's going eventually, and I'll have an issue of a book. It'll fix it. There's a new digital comics company that I'm going to be working for, and they asked me to work on a particular title, and it's kind of, one of those high concept, fun superhero concepts. I don't have a story yet, but I came up with the villain for the story. So I was walking through the living room 2 days ago, and I came up with Necrotiti, Queen of the Vile. I don't know what the story's about. I will in 2 weeks, I expect. But at least I have a starting place, and that's where they usually all come from unique starting places. Sometimes from the newspaper. There really are a number of occasions where I've read some small little filler article and went, if you just twisted that this much, that would be a great story. I've come up with some by going to a movie, and as a writer, I always try to write ahead. I'm figuring out the movie and where it's going. And when the movie goes someplace entirely different than I went, A, I'm thrilled because it surprised me, and B, I realized, well, then I can do that as my story. And so I get them that way. I have written thousands of stories in 45 years, and there are probably thousands of different sources for every story. Your turn.
I'll typically steal ideas from people smaller and weaker. Actually, most of the work that I do is illustrating other people's stories. So I feel like my job is much more that of a craftsman than of an originator or an artist. I want to be a window and just translate the story that was told to me by the writer in as clear a way as possible to the reader. It's like a game of telephone, and I want to transcribe what was said to me as clearly as possible. And there's still a lot of creative choices made in there. It's not unlike you're playing every single part of the film, plus being the cinematographer and the costume designer and the set designer and everything else. Also, quite frankly, I do a lot of work for companies like Marvel Comics and DC Comics where I don't own the material, and I'm kind of terrified of accidentally having an idea in there because I won't own it. In places where I have originated the material, it really can come from anywhere. With this book here, Underground, that came when that's a spelunking thriller, that vastly overworked genre right there, and that came to me when I was reading an essay by Tim Cahill, who was writing about spelunking. And he started it off with a paragraph that just listed ways that spelunkers had died in the previous year. And it was a grueling piece of prose. And despite having a couple of things that actually made me laugh out loud, in one case, a caver died from exploding bat shit.
That's the way to go.
Yeah, I want that on my tombstone. Yeah.
Really?
it's better than what's going to be there.
We have David Hilary taking notes.
There we go.
I
Yeah.
was saying the tombstone would say something like "guano away."
Yes. Bat soon. And I thought that's just that paragraph right there is a bunch of really, really wonderful set pieces in a story where there'd be a lot of very black backgrounds, and it just seemed like a project that was made for comics. So I sat down and I attempted to write it myself, and I had 3 or 4 drafts that I wasn't really quite happy with, and I realized it's because by the nature of where the caves are in the U.S., it had to take place either in Kentucky or New Mexico, and I did not have either of the regional voices in my head. But a studio mate of mine, a fellow named Jeff Parker, who's A, wonderful writer, and B, grew up about half an hour from the Kentucky state line. I was consulting with him on this story, and very quickly he was telling me things about my own characters, and I realized, you're going to write this. I don't know if you get a vote in that, but you're going to write it. And it turned out to be a terrific collaboration. So that's where my ideas come from, lists of terrible deaths.
Jeez. I guess I'll just keep it on a down note. Honestly, in thinking about how Badhouses came about, I was thinking a lot about mortality, and also about how we decide what we hold on to and what we let go, how people's possessions can come to dominate their space and their lives and their concepts of themselves. And so what it means to make those decisions about what you're going to keep and what you're going to discard.
Quick summary?
Okay, yes. So Badhouses is about a boy who helps his mom run estate sales. So basically, when somebody has died and they're selling off everything that's left, and he falls for a girl whose mom is a hoarder, who of course has not been able to really get rid of anything. And so it was really pretty early on in the process that I realized that A, I wanted it to be a graphic novel, and B, I really wanted to work with Carlos B. McNeil, and fortunately that's exactly what ended up happening. And the only other thing I would say is that it helped me a lot as I was writing to know that I would be working with Carla, because I already knew her art, loved it, and knew that anything that I threw at her, she was going to be able to do magnificently with. So that was that.
Okay, I'm going to have one more question, then I'm going to have the panel ask each other questions, okay? I think I can safely say that all of you have been successful in your professional endeavors. I don't think anybody here would disagree with that. But certainly part of a professional life is to, anticipate and to meet new challenges. Now, Dave, I know, for example, The Inappropriate Word, the second of the books that you have illustrated, represented a new direction for you. But I'm wondering, of the panel here, are there still things either in the format that you work in now or another format, another kind of thing, are there still things professionally that you want to do that you are not currently doing in your comics and cartoon work? So I can pass it down again. Whoever wants to talk.
You get to start. Yeah.
Oh, I get to start again. Okay. That's actually, when you do this kind of work, you end up doing a fair number of interviews and doing panel discussions and talking to other cartoonists. And I think it's the first time I've ever heard that question. I think
good.
That's a really good question, yeah. Because there are a finite number of things you can do. I mean, in some ways there are an infinite number of things you can do with drawing and art, but in some ways it's finite, especially if you want to make money. And so I've always been one of those people that I like to make a decision that I want to try something and I see if it works. And so I always wanted to get the New Yorker, and I got the New Yorker, and then I stopped submitting because I got the New Yorker, and that was not for me. And then children's books, I decided I wanted to do a children's book. But but a lot of what we do, and this is a preface to answering the question, is there's a lot of luck involved. I mean, it should be sort of an egoless kind of thing, because there are so many talented people. I mean, so many, even here, there's just so many talented people. I see people coming up through college that can draw circles around me. And so a lot of it is just luck. You're in the right place at the right time, or you're persistent. You just don't quit. Like I said, I got syndicated when I was 30 just because I was too stupid. I should have quit when I was about 27. Really, I was just, but it just I kind of hung in there until everybody else fell on the wayside, and I'm like, oh, Jesus, all right. Outstanding good stuff. So right now I'm in the middle of doing, actually, to answer the question, I'm actually doing something I always wanted to do, which is a chapter book. So kind of like a Wimpy Kid kind of thing. And so with the children's books I do are with Macmillan, and my editor told me that the kind of hot thing right now is these chapter books like that size, so that kids in middle school can throw them in their backpacks, and I don't know, they're like 200 pages long or something. And they had bought one of my children's books about the early bird's brother, who has a big head and little wings and can never get the worm. And she said, would you change this picture book into a chapter book? And so that's what I'm doing right now. It just worked out very lucky for me that something I wanted to do happens to be something that people are buying right now. So I don't really know what else. It's hard when you're in the work to look outside and see what do you want to do next, because you're so involved in the work. it really does. It takes up all of your time between thinking of ideas and then drawing them and getting a few hours of sleep. And I've got 2 kids, and so it's just this sort of vicious cycle of catching up. I feel like I'm never ahead. I'm just constantly catching up. So the idea of sitting down and going, God, what's out there I haven't done, is sort of something it wouldn't even occur to me to think I need a new thing. How can I get busier? So I think for me the answer would be the chapter books, probably.
Okay.
So with the Olympics on, I found myself glued to the screen, and I really, really want to do snowboard cross.
All right.
Yeah, but I don't know. Okay, like Dave, I feel like that 7 a week thing is always there. It's always sitting on my shoulder, and so I don't feel like I have that luxury of looking around. And I think that as I love cartooning, And I think when you do something for 20 years and you do it professionally, your relationship changes. It goes from your calling to your vocation, and you have different feelings about it. I feel like that when I'm doing it, the moments that I'm coming up, when I get the idea, that's like the juiciest moment. It's no longer the cartoon for the train ticket. I don't get that rush anymore. That was kind of a first thing. But the one thing that I am doing that I'm excited about, how you were saying you liked being you weren't the content creator, you were the shaper of it. So a friend of mine was one of the original card counters at MIT who went to Vegas.
No kidding.
And the story has been told, but it's only been the guy's story, and it gets kind of Hollywoodized, and there are very few female characters in it. And so I've been listening to her talk about her stories and taping them, and then I hope to be kind of the crafter of her memoir. And so that's something that jazzes me, and it's so different from having to come up with content. It's about shaping it. So
Prose or a GN? Prose or as a graphic novel?
oh God, no, I wouldn't do a graphic novel. Too much work. So no, prose. It would just be prose. There'd be no. I wouldn't want to draw a single thing. So that's me.
Okay.
It's hard for me. I've been doing this for so long that I've actually gotten to write virtually everything I ever wanted. I've worked in every medium. I've written every medium of comic book story. I've written movies. I've written live action television. I've written half-hour television. I've written animated television. I've written novels. I've written kids' books. I mean, 1 month, about a year and a half ago, I was looking at what I was writing, and I was writing 4 stories that month that were due. I was doing a superhero story. I was doing a horror story. I was doing a Western story, which I was thrilled to do because that genre doesn't really exist much in comics. And I was writing an issue of The Simpsons. How much more diverse can you get? I've actually wanted to work in other mediums. Even though I've written novels, I don't do it often because I can't afford to. It doesn't pay anywhere near as well as a lot of the other mediums I work in. I would like to write a young adult novel, I think. It's the only thing I don't think I've done. And I think it's a very popular medium and would give me a chance to flex another muscle.
Well, I've put aside my initial impulse, which was to leave comics for dance.
Yeah, so you
Yeah.
think you can dance?
Well,
right?
No, I think my next goal would be to move away from adventure stories. With the current project I'm doing at Marvel, I've had my Leslie Nielsen moment, for lack of a better way to put it, where I'm finally getting to be funny on a regular basis on the page and actually getting laughs from readers, and that's been a really new thing for me. Because for the most part, my art has always been where comedy stops. And it's been a really new experience actually using pictures to get laughs from readers. But beyond that, I'd like to do more straight non-genre fiction, the kind of stories that you would have seen in a literary magazine 15, 20, 30 years ago. I'd like to do in comics. I really like that sort of project. I like telling stories that are just metaphors for things that people are undergoing in their life, but actually look like the lives that people are living. So I'm hoping to get to do more of that. Failing that, I could happily continue drawing one guy in tights, whomping another guy in tights for the next 25 years.
And then there's dance.
Yeah, but then there's the dance. That is the dance.
Or one guy with tights.
All right, you're going to get into tights later, right?
Yes.
Part of it? Okay.
We'll talk.
I didn't mean for it to go exactly there, but all right. So when I think about stuff that I haven't done, a lot of it is around either different genres or specific different artists I'd like to collaborate with, because as somebody who can't draw, obviously I am never going to do a graphic novel by myself. So I get excited just thinking about other folks that might be really great to work with. I also think that there's really interesting stuff happening now in nonfiction, especially for younger readers. There's some really cool things happening with graphic nonfiction. And so it might be interesting to do that at some point. Fantasy is also really interesting genre that a lot of interesting stuff can happen in. But yeah, a lot of it is around like, who would I really love to work with, and then scheming about how I could possibly make that happen.
Good. Next part, again, I would like to ask my panelists if they have any questions to ask. So do we have any volunteers here?
I have a good one.
All right.
Just if he wants to start.
I've been waiting for this moment.
We're in trouble.
Yeah.
Actually, what I want to know is, for Steve and Sara, is how is it working together? I mean, to me, that seems like a really, being creative and coming up with your own ideas can be a very personal thing. And I know you don't, I know you're not collaborating specifically, but you're working.
We have.
side by side. And you have,
Yeah.
okay. So, I mean, I'd just be curious how that works in the middle of a marriage.
Oh, it ruins it.
I have to tell the story about the convention years ago that we were at in Spain, and there was a similar question that came up, and Steve had a long answer that, was about, that how pleasant it was and how well we worked together, and this was all getting translated into Spanish, and I took Spanish for a long time. And when the microphone got passed to me, I just said the single word, mentiroso, which is liar.
I'm thinking this through carefully. No, it's really worthwhile because Sara's a terrific storyteller who comes from a world entirely of telling stories with words. She was a very accomplished prose writer before writing her first panel of comics. So a lot of the initial collaboration was just me doing a comics 101 of this is an element that makes sense in a prose context that you wouldn't really want to use in a comics context.
Yeah, I'll give the specifics. So the very first thing I tried to do as a comic was adapting one of my own short stories. And I had a paragraph that I was really, really fond of describing the moon. And it was in summer, and it was shining. And Steve looked at this paragraph, and he drew a circle. And he said, "Here's the moon." And he drew some lines around it. "It's shining. Give me something that advances the plot."
Yeah. I really am a good husband.
We should have somebody.
Yeah. Actually, we're taking this too long. Let's.
No, yeah. No. What questions?
No. More questions, folks?
Well, here's just this. How my question is to you guys. How do your spouses figure into your work?
Oh, interesting. Mine is the most weird, convoluted relationship I can think of. I met my wife by accident by being at a convention I hadn't intended to go to. I was supposed to be somewhere else that weekend. And David Gerald, who's an old friend of mine, the guy who created the Tribbles, was walking down the corridor. I was leaning against a table talking to somebody, and he's pointing out to this young woman who's walking with him, "Okay, you got to get him, you got to get her," and points to me, "Definitely him." And it turned out she was a photographer for the Washington Post at that time, and a science fiction fan. She was a member of Washington, D.C. science fictiondom. and had gotten talked into by the con committee at one of the upcoming World Cons to do a gallery of famous fantasy writers. So she was there, she had a lot of other guys, and David, knowing me and who I was, said, him. So we made an appointment for her to take my photo. The first thing she said, which endeared her to me wonderfully when we sat down, was, okay, so David says I have to shoot you. Who the hell are you? Yeah, and she goes, who the hell are you? And I hadn't heard that in a long time. I went, oh, well. And so she did the photo shoot, and is that my mom? Trust me, if you know. Anyway, so
She said mentirosa.
so she did the photo shoot, and I liked her, and I invited her to a birthday party of one of my dear friends who was going to be at the convention that weekend, and we started to see each other. Then she decided that artists were being ripped off in the business, and so she decided to become an attorney. So she moved to Cleveland, went to Case Western, got her degree, and we stayed in touch and dated long distance where she was there. And then she moved out and became my attorney. And was a terrific attorney. She is one of these women, you know, I always have to talk down from nuclear. My nickname as she was practicing was Scorched Earth. She would leave nothing behind. But she also helped with my career. So she's never affected my work. Well, she gets it now, and she gets being with me, which is frequently an effort, because there are people going, oh my God, that's him. And she's going, believe me, he doesn't flush properly. So, you learn to live with what you get out of your. But you know, she affects my life in ways that I never expected she would. I mean, especially, you know, I got rid of my agent because of her. Yeah, I wrote a screenplay, and my agent said, we can get you this great deal, and got us this great deal. It's a wonderful deal. It's the best we can possibly get. And I said, well, let me pass it by my attorney, who improved the deal by 15%. At which point I went, well, I don't really need my agent anymore. All I need is Scorched Earth. She takes care of it. And does. Anytime I get involved in stuff, she's very good. But she sort of gets it now. She gets, okay, this is what I have to live with. But tolerates it, tolerates me. And that, she is very supportive without wanting to hear about what I do all the time. Stop telling me stories. That's what I do for a living. What do you mean stop telling you stories? He said, can't we just sit tonight and do something normal? It's an adventure. Oh, that's right. Yes.
No. My wife married me despite the fact that of what I do. And she's really, it's a cliche, but I'm sort of the spacey. I literally, my studio is in the attic of my old home downtown Ann Arbor. So I'm literally like that guy up in the belfry. And she's the hyper-organized, takes care of everything else. So I mean, in that sense, so in one sense, she's like totally not into cartoons at all, which really works out well for me, because then we don't have these discussions about cartoons. I mean, she's happy to listen to me talk a little bit about it, but I think she just like literally married me despite the fact that it has nothing to do with it. She doesn't love me for what I do at all. I mean, we just get along great otherwise. But she takes care of all the other stuff. So it works out fine. And the best part about her not really liking cartoons is that when I show her stuff, she's the perfect objective foil. So she'll read my comics and I'll get a really overly honest reaction all the time. So it's, I mean, when I'm in the mood for an overly honest reaction, I'll show her stuff. Otherwise, I just sort of leave them out and I go do things. But yeah, she's not involved in my career. Like, she'd be so disinterested in being involved in my career. I think that'd be her nightmare. Being involved in my career.
My girlfriend is a teacher, and she thought that if she wasn't going to be a teacher, she might like to be a cartoonist. And she's like, yeah, now that I see what you do, no effing way. But she's a very good editor, and so I am always being like, hey, I've got, what do you think about this idea? And so at the, we don't live in the same place, so one of the days I see her is on Thursday nights, and Friday is more of a deadline, so I try and like get all my pencils done so I can show her stuff. And really, I think she just gets the genre, she gets the timing of jokes, and she gets if something's confusing. So I've found that to be awesome, more awesome than I think she's found that to be.
Any other questions, panelist questions?
No, you stole mine earlier.
Okay. Can't think of another one.
It's open to two.
So, last part, what questions do you folks have?
There's one of them now.
Okay. It seems like you two have more of a freelance kind of take on this with the 365, and you're kind of like a head honcho from what I'm picking up, and you two are both very collaborative. And I was just, so I guess the question is mainly for you then. Where do you locate the people to work collaboratively with comics? Is it mainly through email, through Green Brain, you know?
Thanks. I broke into comics by doing short comic stories, like 8-page comic stories, and on the first day of every month, I would mail them out to every single editor and every single assistant editor and every other comics professional whose address I had. This is snail mail days, so I would just take a giant stack of envelopes to the post office. And I did this for about a year until people started noticing that I was making deadlines before I had them. And that's a valuable skill in comics, almost as valuable as actually being able to draw as being able to make a deadline. And so that got me my break. A guy named Archie Goodwin at DC Comics gave me an in, and I got a foot in, and then I just started shoving other body parts through. Now I'm in a good enough position that I'm actually able to say no to things and pick jobs as they come in. And yeah, so for the most part, I'm coasting on greater work for my youth.
Well, and Steve didn't mention that he's also part of a really big shared workspace. So Periscope Studio in Portland, there's like 26 professionals in there. And it's not that everybody's collaborating with each other all the time, but there definitely are some times when people might, like 2 or 3 people might be working on the same thing, or there's just a lot of talk about what people are working on. And I would say that in my own case, collaboration comes from, again, like knowing people's work and trying to just think about, well, you know, sometimes you actually just have to ask somebody if they would like to work with you. And sometimes they say yes, but you have to be okay with if they say no, or if they say that, you know, they won't have time for like 5 years. But yeah, that's sort of the model, I guess.
In a very weird way, that sort of thing it's like walking up to somebody and asking them if they'd like to go on a date for 6 months.
Sometimes it just feels like you've been doing it.
Len, you could answer that too.
sorry,
I
yeah,
think
well,
since you work with many collaborators.
Oh, God, yes. What I was taught by an old pro very early in my career is that there are 3, you need to be 2 of the following 3 things to work continually. You need to be really good at what you do. You need to never miss a deadline, always be right on time, and you need to be fun to work with. There are guys I have worked with who are always on time, really terrific. I wouldn't get trapped in a room with for $1. There was guys like me who was egocentrically really good to work with and lots of fun to work with. And they liked the work. I was never on time. I was cursed since I was on editorial staffs half the time in my early days with knowing the real deadlines. So notice when I was working, I would work for other guys, and they would say, okay, it's due Friday, March 1st. And I knew they didn't need it into production till middle of April. So, first week of April, everything would be in. But not according to the schedule. I was way late. And I got fired off a few books over the years for that. Then I started working in television, where I discovered being on time is really important, or they run a half hour of dead air if your show's not done on time. So I came back through comics after a number of years in television with the reputation of, oh God, he's great to work with and he's really good, but you're never going to get your book on time. And everything was in early. Things would show up and they could come late. But I said, I discovered there are places it's important you make the deadline. So I do, but that's what you need to remember. You can be a bastard and really good and always on time and work, and any of the other two combinations. I just bypassed that. There's nobody in particular.
Next question. Pat.
I'm just curious whether any of you have, I work in theater, and I'm curious whether any of you have fused your talents into live performance, either performance art or theater for young audiences or theater for any audience, and would just encourage you that might be a new thing to try.
Go. Please go.
Well, one of the things that really helped in my cartooning career was taking an improv class in college, because it was that justification piece that I was mentioning earlier, and it was, instead of talking about something, you bringing the characters to that actual place and making that situation happen. And it was taking things to almost to their extreme, being big. So that's how theater has influenced my comic, but kind of as a creative outlet to my creative outlet. I don't draw characters in my strip. I draw snapshot situations. And so I collaborated with a friend of mine to write a play. And it's kind of a cartoony play. It's called Santa-Side, and Santa gets offed at the North Pole. And which of the bastard people that worked there did it? But it was, at first when I was writing it, I felt like I was moving chess pieces around, like I was God, and I could just say, oh, well, this person needs to leave now. But then when I got to know the characters, it was really interesting to go from snapshot work to character work, and get to know the characters and see why they would want to leave the stage, or why they wouldn't want to leave the stage. But I haven't really thought about it in terms of my actual turning stuff from my cartoon, because I feel like I come up with a joke first, and then I interview the characters for who should belong in that joke. And then there's just one other piece to answer. It's about your thing about collaboration, is that while I do a lot of my jokes, I come up with a lot of my jokes, I do collaborate with some people. There's somebody in the audience right now who is a great cartoonist, and she sent me some ideas. And it's sometimes, like, doing the 7 a week is so hard, and it's really great to have somebody send you something that either is like, whoa, this is great, or, oh, this sends me in a different direction. Oh, I hadn't thought about things this way, or I hadn't thought about the devil this way, or something like that. And that's a piece to the business that doesn't get talked about much. But Charles Adams, for example, collaborated with idea people all the time. So, yeah.
I adore the theater. If I were, tomorrow they threw me out of the comic and television business, I would find a way to work in the theater. I have always loved it. It's a lifelong passion. There is a quiz show on YouTube called The Experts that airs every Monday morning. You can find it. And the premise of this series is you introduce yourself. Hi, my name is Fred. I am an IT professional, but I'm an expert on, the World War II. And everyone does that. You're an expert on something that you don't do for a living. I was a contestant on the show. It's a no-money show. It really isn't. About a month ago. And knowing it was me, the first guy came on and said, "Hi, I'm Fred, I'm an IT technician, but I'm an expert on the comic book character Wolverine." And I got to come up next and say, "Hi, I'm Len. I created Wolverine, but I'm an expert on composer Stephen Sondheim," which is what I went on for. And I forget what the third guy was, I don't know what he did, but he was an expert on the Masters, the golf tournament. Scary, so much so that on the one question, he said, "No, we're sorry. You got 2 or 3 parts of the answer right, but you're wrong about this." He said, "No, you are." And he said, "Why?" He said, "Today that answer is correct, but when this thing airs next month, that part will be different." It's about the sponsors. And they went, "What?" And he had them check online, Google it, and they came back and said, "Sorry," and gave him the point. Wow. But I mean, I go to New York, or used to at least once or twice a year. I'd be there for a week, and I'd spend the entire week going to the theater every night. Whatever was open I could get tickets to, I would do.
And does that feed your work?
It feeds my heart. Every month in Los Angeles, there is a wonderful stage show called The Thrilling Adventure Hour. It's podcast, you can hear it on the air. It's a radio show that's supposedly 3 classic radio shows that have been, they're performing. It's all made up. It's written by 2 guys who used to be TV writers, and it's 3 different shows. One, a space western called Sparks, Nevada, Marshall on Mars, a rotating center feature, and a feature called Beyond the Belief, which essentially is the story of Nick and Nora Charles, if they were A, people able to see ghosts, and B, more interested in the alcohol than in the crime solving. And I've become good friends with the guys who run the show, and they're major Hollywood stars, guest star every month. They just show up for free. And they turned to me and asked me to write one, so I've now written my first stage piece, and I'm probably going to do more of that, and I'm happier about that than about anything I've done recently. But oh yeah, the theater is compelling to me.
I'd say it's impacted on me in 2 ways. One, I've got a client in my parallel career as a commercial artist. I do a lot of drawing for a guy named Michael Curry, who does theatrical puppets. He did the animals for The Lion King. If anywhere you've seen Julie Taymor do anything with big abstract puppets or anything like that, Michael's the guy doing that. And I do a lot of the drawing for him. And,
wow, I did not know. You're my new best friend.
And I learned a lot about storytelling with working with him. For a long time, as a comics artist, I was fixated on naturalism and on researching everything and trying to put every last bit of environmental detail into the pictures. And Michael, this designer, said that he told me that a well-designed abstraction will impact on your audience far, far more strongly than the most elaborately constructed, realistic setting. And I realized that he's absolutely right. It was a big help in stripping away some needless detail in my drawing. Similarly, just going to the theater and seeing how few props on a stage can still communicate the important facts of a scene, the elemental facts of a scene, was really, really valuable in making me realize how much you can take out of a picture and still tell the audience everything they need to know about that scene. That level of abstraction, that's the basis of putting theater in front of people, was really, really valuable to me.
Can I borrow one last time? I'm sorry. It reminds me of the greatest line I ever heard about comic book art, which was from Alex Toth. Mm-hmm. And Alex is one of the best minimalists there ever was. He said, "I spent the first half of my career learning what to put into my work, and the second half learning what to leave out." Mm-hmm. And he could tell more with 6 lines than other guys could with 500.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say my work is actually influenced from having done theater in the past, and I'm really fond of theater as a setting. So one of my prose novels is actually around a community theater troupe, and I also have a series of mini comics about a circus, and it's really much more about the backstage interactions and drama, but I love that. I love that kind of hothouse and thinking about what it does to people.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Over there.
Yes. John?
Okay, this is specifically for Glenn, but it's also this idea. I was wondering, the more I've become familiar with Alan Moore, I realize that he is extremely crusty. And so I know that you had to edit him for The Watchmen. So first thing I was wondering, how was that? And then my other question is, which came first, Man-Thing or Swamp Thing?
Yes. The Man-Thing, Swamp Thing story is so hard to explain and have people believe, because I created Swamp Thing on the train on my way to the office one day, without realizing that my then roommate, Jerry Conway, was busy creating Man-Thing in his room next door. And the two characters came out about the same month, and I swear to God, neither of us knew the other was working on their version. So the answer is yes. Alan was easier to work with back when I was working with him. He hadn't gone completely insane yet. And he put everything into his work. I mean, everything. Any Watchmen script that came in was about 25 pages of comic book art and story. And the script would be 137 pages long. Because they had the 9-panel grid they had decided on to use, and Alan would describe every panel, in minute detail. It's a room. There's a window there. It's got lace curtains with a frill on the side. There's a cigarette tray with 3 empty cigarettes, only one of which has lipstick on it. There's a cockroach walking across the floor, and he goes on like this in each panel, and then ends it with, of course, if that doesn't work for you, just do what you think is right. It was like this for the entire book. Alan is a very hard road to hoe. People ask me, what is he doing these days? And I say, he's studying to become a magician. And they say, oh, I said, no, not David Copperfield, Stephen Strange. That's what he's looking to be. He's looking to be able to move things with his mind. But he's a brilliant wordsmith. I mean, I don't think he's the best writer in the history of comics, because as his editor, about halfway through our run on Swamp Thing together, I realized, hey, wait, this is exactly the same plot as the last story, which was exactly the same plot as the last story. So, but his word craft was so breathtaking, no one cared. I think he's arguably the single best wordsmith in the history of the business. But he's got his problems.
Jay?
This question specifically for Hilary.
Yay.
One of the things I really like about your artwork is the fluidity of your designs, and I was just curious what you drew with.
Oh, well, I start out with a light blue pencil, and I draw the strip there. And when you look, if you guys look downstairs at some samples, you'll see that a lot of different decisions get made before I get to the final one. And then once I'm satisfied with it, I take a micron pen. There's a thick one for the borders, and that's a 1. And then there's a 0.8 or 0.8 for the insides. And I've always thought it would be fun to try a different type of pen, and then I get scared. Oh, and I use, I was at a Myra Coleman exhibit. Do you know the illustrator Myra Coleman? She's fantastic. And when I was looking at her work, I was looking at the little materials that she used. So it would say like, 2-ply Bristol paper, India ink, correction fluid. And I was like, yeah, that's one of my materials. And it's legitimate. It was so freeing.
Go ahead, yes.
question in regards to where the inspiration comes for your work. Hilary had mentioned that in conversations with friends, retrospectively, they might ask if the topic was worthy of inspiration. Do you ever find it problematic to have people trying to inspire you, maybe haphazardly?
I think the mistake that some people make is you'll be at a Thanksgiving table and they'll go, "Oh, our family's so crazy. You should draw a cartoon about it." And the thing is, that's a topic, but it's not a specific ideas, and jokes come from very, very specific ideas. And so that's kind of when I'm like, uh-huh. I think that the cartoons come when they say something and I was like, oh, that's a comic strip idea. They weren't necessarily pitching it, they were just being genuine. And it's in that tiny, authentic moment that the seed of a cartoon lives. So yeah, but they're like, oh, I got the uh-huh.
Dave, you want to answer that one too? Because I'm sure it's relevant to you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I get most of my ideas on a desert island. I mean, but it's true. I mean, it's like the problem with that, it's not just the Thanksgiving thing, it's anywhere, is that somebody else, some funny thing will happen, and it will be genuinely funny. And somebody will say, oh, there's a cartoon coming, and there never is. I don't mean that rude. I mean, it's not that it's not a funny moment, but every funny moment has context. And so something like there's an assumption in the beginning of that funny thing, and there's something that's going to happen afterwards. You all have separate personalities that made it funny. So the reason it was funny was because you're right there in that moment. When you draw a cartoon, no one's right there in that moment unless they're all sitting in your studio with you in your chair thinking about batshit or whatever, you know what I mean? So I feel like our job is to take those sort of nuggets of moments that were funny and for one reason, and to think in terms of like, how do I get everything that needs to be in that box told? You know, so you have the funny thing, but everything else that would lead to that funny thing, or you know, jokes that were like impending doom jokes. So where you're basically like somebody's about to get hurt, but they don't get hurt in the comic. So it's funny because you don't see them get hurt, but you know they're about to get hurt. So we're actually picking those moments where something funny might happen, but we have to sort of cut it out.
Yeah.
You know, you actually have a scene, and so that's why the funny ones in real life don't work, because it's an entire scene. So our job is to like see that whole scene and then pick that cell, that still moment that best sums up what that funny thing was.
Occasionally my dad will call, and this is the kind of idea that he gives me. That Marmaduke strip, big dogs are so funny. You should do a comic about a big dog. And then the other one I was like, Dilbert is in a lot of papers. Why don't you do an office comic? Like, and that's as far as it goes. And it's like, you've got to dig a lot deeper for that to be helpful for
I
me.
want to look a big dog in an office.
A big dog in an office?
Ah, there you go. It's perfect.
Yeah. Caulking features.
Yeah, I get it too. I get people in real life who find out what I do and go, you should do about a comic book about my profession. I'm sure there's a great superhero podiatrist. I get that from the least likely places. How am I the mortician superhero? You know?
Well, but do you explain to them why that's not a good idea?
No,
That
I'm
would be
not. They're
interesting.
working on my body. I'm not going to tell them.
Could you explain to us why there's not super podiatrist?
This is by a guy in an office. I mean, it comes down to what things are inherently a great starting point to do new stories. If you can name 7 good superhero podiatrist stories to me, I will pay you cash money.
We probably have time for one more question. So Eric, there in the back.
Yeah, I'm an artist and I have a day job. So I work my day job and then I go home and I make art. And I do odd jobs, odd freelance jobs. and I have jobs that I really want to do for myself, but they don't pay any money. And then I have jobs that I can get for commission. I don't really want to do them unless they bring in money. So I guess my question is, everybody has their own path, but how do you get to that point where you have jobs that you want to do and they're making money at the same time and they advance your career? I know that's a big question, I guess, but.
That's a good question.
It's a really good question.
Yeah, I can start, I'll pass it down. I think that's a really good question. I'll just answer quickly and pass it down. I think you're doing exactly what almost all of us have done. I mean, that's what you do. You take, the thing I learned, there's a cartoonist named Kevin Pope in Indiana. He's done like Pop-Tarts, calendars and stuff. He's a freelance guy. And he told me early on when I was first starting out that like never turn down a job. So you always take the work. I mean, like no matter what it is. I used to do these children's books, and they gave me $5 a drawing. So so it was like, they're not big drawings, but geez, $5. I mean, it was like I'd do 40 drawings and for the month, and that wasn't very much money at all. And I'd be up for like 3 nights in a row doing these different things. But it made me better. Like I got better at working faster. There's always something about any job, no matter what it pays, or even if it's for free, that makes you better at something. And my experience has been, I think probably all of the experience, like you do one job, and it's a little bit of a snowball. It leads to another thing. Like you never know who you're going to meet. So as long as you're in the industry somehow, take advantage of every connection you can take advantage of. If you're somebody you could meet them, get an email address or whatever. It's all about who you talk to and like who you, not just who you know, but staying in there. Not just sort of, the big mistake I see with especially like high school kids and stuff is they're really talented and they think, oh, I'm so good that I'm going to draw these things, and then the doorbell's going to ring. That just almost never happens. I mean, you just have to like talk to people and meet other cartoonists and get in the industry, and then people will recommend you, and they'll say, oh, this guy's work was great. And so that's just, I mean, it's really a snowball.
I agree with everything Dave said, and add a cautionary bit, which is that the stuff about doing stuff for free all the time. There's a certain point in when you're starting out where the statement it's good exposure is true, and then after a certain point, there's this great cartoonist Kim Warp who on her frequently asked questions page says, will you do this for free? It's good exposure. And her response to that is, people die of exposure. So you have to value your work, and you may not get what you think you should get, but you have to, I think people don't take the art seriously unless you take the art seriously. And be it $5, $30, $300, that it does have value, and you need to eat.
I agree with everything the two of them just said. But Ed, you are valued by how you value yourself. If you take on work for free for the exposure, well, he works for free. How good can he be? You've got to find a line that you can live with and never cross it. As you work for money, people start using you more because they go, well, if people are willing to pay him, then other people, then clearly there's something to the work. There is a tendency by hirers of any of what we do to believe that you get hired. All those movies you've seen over the years by Hollywood directors who have never made a good movie ever, but they keep getting work. They keep getting work because somebody else hired them. In Hollywood especially, they are always looking for a plausible deniability, which is that, well, how did I know he would be the worst director since the invention of cheese? I mean, look at all the movies he's made. Other people have hired him. You have to value yourself, and you have to, again, you have to eat. It's important. If no matter what exposure you may get, I would never, even in my very early days, work for free. I do it now occasionally because it's something I really want to do, and I don't have to worry about my reputation, but I wouldn't even in the beginning. And I've had many people I know tell other beginners in those early days, no. Do what if it has value to you, it should have value to the people who have hired you. They will treat it with more respect. They will look at it with a finer eye. And I think, here and more.
Yeah, my advice would boil down to be productive, doing the kind of work you want to do. I think it's nice to be paid to learn stuff when it's stuff you don't want to do. I would never do a project that doesn't personally interest you for low dollars. If you're going to work for almost no money when you have a day job, you may as well work for no money and just work on your dream project. The difference between almost no money and no money isn't really worth quibbling over. So when you're drawing for free or near free, let it be the thing that you want to see existing in the world, because at least then you get your dream project out there. Beyond that, I would say network like a fiend. Get out there, make sure that every good piece of work you do gets in front of every possible eyeball who could possibly do you any good. Now, you don't want to be that guy at the party. We all know who we're talking about. But get your work in front of people. Use every social media that's available to you. My dear friend Benjamin Dewey does a strip called the Tragedy Series that he puts on Tumblr. Initially, he was trying to cultivate an air of mystery about it, like these were comic strips from 150 years ago. So he wouldn't put his name on them, and then he started seeing his comics with 150,000 notes bouncing around Tumblr and no name attached to it. That made it easier for him to put his name on it. And now, after several years of putting this dream project of his out there for free, he has a book deal. He has people clamoring to buy prints of his work. But his big thing was using, in this case, Tumblr for its ease of passing things around. Folks liked it, they saw it, they passed it around to others. Unlike cartoonists who were coming in when I was starting or before then, there are no gatekeepers anymore. You can produce a magnificent thing and get it out there in front of people, and the world can jump on it without you ever having to impress a publisher. Put your stuff on the web, put it out there where everybody can see it, and keep producing more stuff, because the best advertisement for your new work is your old work, and vice versa. That's what I got. Lots of work. Get it out there with your name prominently on it, and keep impressing people with good stuff.
I'm the only person on this panel who has a day job. And I actually want to say a word in praise of the day job, because honestly, I also work as a librarian, and the fact that I know that there's a steady amount of money coming in every month has allowed me to be really deliberate about the projects that I take on. So I'll be honest, for a while I really did think, like, quitting the day job, it's the goal, it's the only thing that anybody wants to do. And then I realized that really it's a different kind of freedom that you get from knowing that you really can choose only the things that you're really passionate about to work on. So I would say, yes to everything everybody else said, but also, day job is maybe okay.
Well, we're out of time here, but I'd like to thank our panelists for a wonderful, wonderful session. Reminder that the exhibition runs in University Gallery through April the 16th. So if you didn't have a lot of time today to check it out, you certainly want to come back. There's more than a lot to see if you haven't seen it already.